At my youngest daughter's dinner, I realized her boyfriend was someone I had spent years trying to forget. I just smiled and welcomed him inside. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I've always believed that family gatherings, no matter how small, should feel like a safe place. A place where laughter comes easily, where memories are shared, and where, for a few hours, the world outside doesn't matter. That night was supposed to be one of those evenings. My youngest daughter, Claire, had been talking about this dinner for weeks. She wanted everything to be perfect. At 68, I don't rush around the kitchen the way I used to, but that afternoon, I found myself moving with a quiet kind of energy. I set the table with my best china, the one with the delicate blue trim my late husband used to admire. I polished the silverware until I could see my reflection in it. I even placed a small vase of fresh white roses in the center of the table, trimming each stem carefully, as if perfection could somehow guarantee a perfect night. Claire had told me about him before. Daniel. For years together. He's kind, Mom. Patient. You're going to love him, she had said over the phone, her voice full of a happiness I hadn't heard in a long time. After everything our family had been through, hearing that kind of joy in her voice felt like a blessing I didn't want to question. Still, there was a small part of me that remained cautious. Not suspicious, just careful. Life has a way of teaching you that happiness can sometimes arrive hand in hand with something else, something you don't see until it's too late. By the time the sun began to set, casting a soft golden light through the kitchen windows, everything was ready. The roast was in the oven, filling the house with a warm, familiar smell. The mashed potatoes sat covered on the stove, and the green beans were lined up neatly in a serving dish. It looked like the kind of dinner I had made 100 times before. Ordinary. Comforting. But that evening didn't feel ordinary. I checked the clock more times than I care to admit. 6:45, then. 6:52, at exactly 7 o'clock, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart lifted slightly. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, smoothing down the front of my blouse as I walked toward the door. Claire's laughter reached me before I even opened it. Mom, she called out as soon as the door swung open, her face bright, her eyes shining. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, holding on a little longer than usual. I hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, grounding myself in something that felt safe. I've missed you, she said softly. I've missed you too, sweetheart, I replied, pulling back just enough to look at her. Then she turned slightly, her hand reaching back. And this is Daniel. For a brief second, time didn't just slow down, it stopped. He stepped forward with an easy smile, the kind that most people would find reassuring. He was well-dressed, composed, confident without being arrogant. The kind of man you'd expect any mother to approve of at first glance. But I wasn't most people. Because I knew that face. Not from a photograph. Not from a passing moment. But from something much deeper, something that had left a mark on my life years ago, something I had buried so carefully I almost convinced myself it had never happened. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the door, though I kept my expression unchanged. Mrs. Carter, he said politely, extending his hand. It's really nice to finally meet you. Claire has told me so much about you. His voice was calm. Measured. Familiar in a way that made my chest feel suddenly tight. I took his hand. Welcome, I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing. And then I smiled. Because in that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just dinner. This wasn't just a boyfriend meeting the family. This was the beginning of something I had hoped would never return. And as I stepped aside to let him into my home, I made a decision. I wouldn't say a word. Not yet. I led him inside as if nothing had happened. The door closed behind us with a soft click. Claire walked ahead, still talking, still glowing, completely unaware of the weight that had just entered the room with us. Daniel followed just half a step behind her, his movements relaxed, confident, like a man who had nothing to hide. I watched him as I walked back toward the dining table. "Your home is beautiful," he said, glancing around, taking in the framed photos on the wall, the polished wood, the quiet details of a life built over decades. "Thank you," I replied. 2 simple words. Nothing more. But I noticed the way his eyes paused, just for a second, on one particular photo near the hallway. A picture of my late husband standing beside me on our 40th anniversary. Most people glanced at it and moved on. He didn't. That was the first confirmation. I pulled out Claire's chair for her, the way I always had. Old habits. She smiled and sat down, reaching for Daniel's hand as he took the seat beside her. "You're going to love Mom's cooking," she said, squeezing his fingers gently. "I already do," he replied, his voice smooth, almost effortless. Too effortless. I moved back to the kitchen without saying anything, giving myself a moment. Just a moment to breathe. The air felt different now. Thicker somehow. As if the past had slipped in quietly and taken a seat at the table before I could stop it. I lifted the lid off the pot, though I didn't need to check it. Everything was already done. Perfect, just like I had planned. Just not for this. When I returned with the dishes, I placed them carefully on the table. Roast first. Then the potatoes. Then the vegetables. My hands didn't shake. Years teach you control, even when your mind is racing. Dinner began the way all dinners do. Plates passed. Glasses filled. Small talk. Claire did most of the talking. She always did when she was happy. She spoke about work, about a trip they were planning, about how Daniel had helped her fix something in her apartment last week. I listened. And I watched. Daniel spoke when appropriate. Never too much. Never too little. He laughed at the right moments. Asked me polite questions. Kept his tone respectful. But there were gaps. Small ones. The kind most people wouldn't notice. "I grew up not too far from here," he said at one point. "Really?" I asked, meeting his eyes. "For a while," he added quickly, picking up his fork. "For a while." I nodded slowly. Claire didn't notice the shift. She was already talking again, filling the silence he had just created. But I stored that detail away. Every word mattered now. Every pause mattered more. At one point, as I reached for the salt, our hands almost touched. Just barely. He pulled back first. And for a split second, just a fraction, I saw it. Not the smile. Not the calm. Something else. Recognition. He knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not yet. But he knew enough to understand that I wasn't just meeting him for the first time. I didn't react. I simply passed the salt. Dinner continued. Claire laughed. The clock ticked softly on the wall. The world outside remained quiet, untouched by what was unfolding inside that room. And I sat there, across from a man who had once brought chaos into my life, now sitting at my table, holding my daughter's hand. I had spent years believing that chapter was closed. I was wrong. And this time, I wasn't going to be caught unprepared. Claire kept talking long after the plates were half empty. She always did that when she was trying to fill a silence she didn't understand. "And then we thought maybe sometime this summer," she said, glancing between us, "we could all take a trip together. Just something small. A cabin, maybe. Somewhere quiet." I nodded. That sounds nice. It did sound nice. In another life. Daniel smiled at the idea, leaning back slightly in his chair. "I'd like that," he said. "It's important to stay close to family." The word family lingered in the air longer than it should have. I looked at him. "Is it?" I asked quietly. He met my gaze without hesitation. "Of course." No pause. No crack. but his fingers tightened slightly around his glass. Claire didn't notice. She reached for his hand again, her thumb brushing lightly over his knuckles. A small gesture. Familiar. Trusting. I turned my attention back to my plate. Claire tells me you've been together for years, I said. That's right, he answered. For years is a long time. It is. Another short answer. Careful. Measured. I took a sip of water. And before that? I asked, setting the glass down gently. Were you in the city the whole time? He shook his head. No. I moved around a bit. Work. Something like that. Something like that. I let the silence stretch this time. Claire shifted slightly in her seat. Daniel's being modest, she said quickly. He's worked on some really interesting projects. You know, consulting, logistics, things like that. I nodded again. Of course. But I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on him. Because I remembered a man who also used vague words. Who never gave direct answers. Who always stayed just out of reach when questions got too close. Years ago, those gaps had cost my family more than I was willing to admit out loud. And now they were sitting right in front of me again. Dinner plates emptied. The conversation drifted. Dessert came and went. At one point, Claire stood up. I'll make some tea, she said, already heading toward the kitchen. I'll help, I added, rising from my chair. No, Mom, sit. I've got it. She disappeared into the kitchen before I could insist. And just like that, it was quiet. Just the two of us. Daniel leaned back slightly, his posture relaxing now that Claire was out of the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. Then he exhaled softly. You recognized me, he said. Not a question. A statement. I folded my hands in my lap. Yes. No point pretending now. His eye studied me carefully. Not nervous. Not surprised. Calculating. That was a long time ago, he said. It was, I agreed. And things were different. I didn't respond. Because I wasn't interested in how he would try to rewrite the past. From the kitchen, I could hear Claire moving around. The soft clink of cups. The sound of water running. Close enough to return at any moment. Daniel leaned forward slightly. I care about her, he said, lowering his voice. Whatever you think you remember, that's not who I am anymore. I held his gaze. People don't say that unless they know exactly what you remember. I didn't say anything, I replied calmly. No, he said. But you didn't have to. Another pause. Heavy this time. Then I did something he didn't expect. I smiled. A small one. Controlled. You're right, I said quietly. People do change. He watched me, trying to read what that meant. But I didn't give him anything else. Not yet. Because the truth is, I wasn't interested in his version of the story. I was interested in the truth. And I had already decided. This time, I wasn't going to rely on memory alone. Claire came back with the tea just as the air between us settled into something quiet again. Chamomile for you, Mom, she said, placing the cup gently in front of me. And green tea for Daniel. Thank you, I replied, wrapping my hands around the warmth of the cup. Daniel leaned back slightly, his expression already softened again. Whatever had passed between us moments ago, he tucked it away quickly. Like it never happened. Claire sat down, smiling between us. Everything okay? She asked lightly. Of course, he answered before I could speak. I nodded once. Everything's fine. And for her, that was enough. We moved into easier conversation after that. Or at least, that's how it sounded on the surface. Claire talked about wedding venues she had seen online, not plans, just ideas, she said, laughing a little as she brushed it off. Nothing serious, she added quickly. But Daniel didn't laugh. He just smiled. And that was when I felt it again, that quiet shift beneath everything. The sense that something was already decided, just not said out loud yet. "You'd look beautiful anywhere," he told her. Simple words. But there was a weight behind them. Claire blushed, lowering her eyes slightly. "You always say that." "Because it's true." I watched them carefully. Not the words. The timing. The control. He knew exactly when to speak. Exactly what to say. Years ago, that same kind of precision had fooled people into trusting him. Into believing he was something he wasn't. I took a slow sip of tea. "Claire," I said gently, "why don't you show me those photos you mentioned earlier? The venues." Her face lit up instantly. "Oh. Yes, I'll grab my tablet." She stood and walked toward the living room, already scrolling through something as she went. And just like that, we were alone again. Daniel didn't waste time this time. "You don't trust me," he said. Quietly. Still not a question. I set my cup down. "Trust isn't something I give easily," I replied. He nodded, as if he expected that. "I understand that," he said. "But whatever happened back then, it's not what you think." There it was again. Not denial. Not really. Just distance. "I haven't said what I think," I answered calmly. A flicker crossed his face. Small. Quick. But I saw it. From the living room, I could hear Claire's voice. "Mom, come look at this one. It's right by the lake." "Not yet." "Not yet." Daniel leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "I'm not here to cause problems," he said. "I care about her. That's all that matters now." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded. "You're right," I said. He seemed almost relieved. But I wasn't agreeing with him. I was agreeing with something else entirely. Because caring about her meant I had a responsibility too. And I wasn't going to ignore what I knew. Claire stepped back into the room, holding out the tablet, her excitement filling the space again. "Look at this one," she said, sitting down beside me. I leaned in, studying the pictures she showed me. A lakeside venue. White chairs. Soft lights. Beautiful. Peaceful. Exactly the kind of place people choose when they believe their future is safe. I smiled at her. "It's lovely," I said. And it was. But as I glanced up again, my eyes met Daniel's. And in that moment, one thing became clear. He thought this was just a matter of time. That if he stayed calm, if he said the right things, if he waited long enough, I would let it go. I didn't look away. Because this time, I wasn't the one waiting. He was. Claire stayed for another hour. Long enough for the tea to go cold. Long enough for the conversation to circle back to the same safe topics, work, weather, small plans that didn't mean anything yet. She didn't notice how little I spoke. Or maybe she did, and chose not to ask. Before leaving, she hugged me again. "Told you you'd like him," she whispered softly. I held her a second longer than usual. "I'm glad you came," I said. And I meant it. Just not in the way she thought. Daniel shook my hand at the door. Firm. Polite. Controlled. "Thank you for dinner," he said. "You're welcome." Our eyes met one last time. No smiles this time. Just understanding. Then they left. The sound of their car faded slowly down the street until the house returned to its natural silence. The kind I was used to. The kind that had never felt heavy before. I closed the door gently. Turned the lock. And stood there for a moment without moving. Then I walked back into the dining room. 2 cups still half full. Plate stacked neatly. The roses in the center of the table already beginning to open a little more under the warm light. Everything looked the same. But it wasn't. I began clearing the table, one item at a time. Plate. Fork. Glass. Slow. Steady. The way I always did. But my mind wasn't in the room anymore. It had already gone back. Years ago. A different house. A different night. Voices raised just enough to stay behind closed doors. Money missing. Promises broken. A man who spoke carefully, never directly, always leaving just enough space to deny everything. No name. No proof. Just damage. And now he had a name. Daniel. I set the last plate into the sink and turned on the water. For a moment, I let it run longer than necessary. Then I dried my hands and walked down the hallway. There was an old drawer in my bedroom. One I hadn't opened in years. Not because I forgot. Because I chose to. I pulled it open slowly. Inside, everything was exactly where I left it. Old documents. A few photographs. And beneath them, the thin envelope, worn at the edges. I picked it up. Held it in my hands. Some memories fade. Others wait. I didn't open it yet. Not tonight. But as I placed it gently on the table beside my bed, I made a quiet decision. This wasn't going to be about suspicion. Or instinct. This time. I was going to be certain. The next morning, I didn't rush. I made coffee the way I always did. Measured. Quiet. The familiar sound of the machine filling the kitchen. Sunlight came through the window, soft and ordinary, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I sat at the table with the envelope beside me. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I let myself think. Claire's face from the night before. The way she smiled at him. The way she trusted him without hesitation. That kind of trust doesn't come easily, and once it breaks, it doesn't come back the same. That was the part that mattered. Not him. Her. I took a slow sip of coffee. Then I reached for the envelope. The paper felt thinner than I remembered. Or maybe my hands just understood its weight better now. Inside were a few documents. Old records. Notes I had written to myself back then, when things didn't make sense but I knew something was wrong. Names. Dates. Small details. Back then, it had all felt incomplete. Like trying to finish a puzzle with missing pieces. Now. I had a face. Daniel. I placed the papers on the table and read through them carefully. No rushing. No skipping. Every line mattered. One name stood out again. Not Daniel. Another one. An alias. I leaned back slightly, letting that settle in. People who change their names usually have a reason. And rarely a simple one. I folded the papers neatly and set them aside. Then I reached for my phone. There was someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I hesitated for a moment before scrolling to the number. It was still there. Untouched. Like the past had been waiting quietly, just like everything else. I pressed call. It rang longer than I expected. Once. Twice. Then a voice answered. Older. Slower. But familiar. Hello? I didn't introduce myself right away. It's been a long time, I said. A pause. Then, Margaret. Yes. Another silence. Heavier this time. I was wondering if you'd ever call, he said. I looked down at the papers in front of me. I think I found him, I said calmly. On the other end, I could hear the shift. The kind you don't need to see to understand. You're sure? Not yet, I replied. But I will be. A breath. Be careful, he said quietly. Last time, it didn't end well. I already knew that. That's why I'm not making the same mistake twice. I ended the call and sat there for a moment. The house was silent again. But it didn't feel empty. It felt focused. I gathered the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and stood up. This wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what he was doing now. And this time, I wasn't going to wait for things to fall apart before I acted. I didn't tell Claire anything that day. She called in the afternoon, her voice light, unchanged. Did you get home okay last night? She asked, even though she had been the one to leave. I did, I replied. Good. I was a little worried you seemed quiet. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. I'm getting older, Claire. I don't have the same energy for long evenings. She laughed softly. You had more energy than both of us. Daniel was really impressed. There it was again. His name. Placed carefully into the conversation, like something she wanted me to accept. I'm glad, I said. A pause. Mom, she added, her tone shifting slightly, I really want you to like him. I looked out the window, watching the street. Still. Ordinary. I want you to be happy, I answered. And that was the truth. It just wasn't the whole truth. After we hung up, I didn't sit down. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't distract myself. I went straight back to the table. The envelope was still there. This time, I didn't open it. I already knew what was inside. Instead, I picked up my phone again. Daniel. I didn't have his number. But Claire did. And Claire shared more than she realized. I opened our message thread and scrolled. Photos. Links. Small pieces of her life she sent me without thinking twice. Then I saw it. A picture from a few weeks ago. The two of them at a cafe. He was tagged. Not Daniel. A different name. I stared at it for a moment. Then I clicked. The profile loaded slowly. New photos. Clean history. Carefully built. Too clean. I scrolled further. Years didn't go back as far as they should have. Gaps again. Always gaps. I studied the details. Friends. Locations. Comments. Patterns started forming. Not clear yet. But familiar. I set the phone down gently. Then picked it up again. This time, I opened something else. A search. The old name. The one from the papers. For a moment, nothing came up. Then, buried deeper, an article. Short. Easy to miss. But not to me. I read it once. Then again. My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. Same city. Same timeline. Same kind of damage. No clear suspect. Of course not. I leaned back in my chair. So he hadn't stopped. He had just moved on. Changed names. Changed places. Same pattern. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Then opened them again. Calm. Clear. This wasn't about doubt anymore. This was confirmation. And for the first time since that dinner, I allowed myself to think one step ahead. Because now I understood something important. He didn't just come into our lives by accident. He chose this. He chose her. And that meant one thing. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. I didn't rush into anything. That was the difference this time. Years ago, I had reacted too late, always one step behind, always trying to understand something that had already slipped through my hands. This time, I stayed still. I observed. 2 days passed before I saw him again. Claire invited me over for dinner. Her place this time. Smaller. Brighter. Filled with little things she had collected over the years, books, candles, framed photos. A life she had built carefully, piece by piece. A life he had stepped into. He opened the door. "Mrs. Carter," he said with that same polite smile. "Daniel," I replied. No hesitation. No warmth. Just acknowledgement. Claire didn't notice. "Come in, Mom," she said, pulling me inside. "We're just finishing up." The smell of food filled the apartment. Something simple. Pasta, I think. She had always preferred easy meals when she was nervous. And she was nervous. I could see it in the way she moved. Slightly faster than usual. The way she checked on things twice. The way her eyes kept drifting toward me, then toward him. She was waiting for something. Approval. I didn't give it. Dinner began the same way as before. Plates. Glasses. Conversation that stayed just above the surface. But this time, I changed something. I asked different questions. "So," I said casually, turning toward him, "how long have you been in the city now?" "A few years," he replied. "4." I asked. He paused. "About that, yes." "About that." Claire jumped in quickly. "He moved here right before we met, Mom." I nodded slowly. "That's a big change. Starting over somewhere new." "It was time," he said. "For what?" He held my gaze. "For something better." Simple answer. Clean. But not complete. I let it sit. Claire cleared her throat lightly. "Daniel's been thinking about expanding his work," she said. "Maybe even starting his own firm." "That sounds ambitious," I replied, still looking at him. He smiled. "Opportunities come when you're ready. Or when you're looking for them." I reached for my glass, taking a slow sip. "Do you ever go back?" I asked. "To where?" he said. "To where you were before." A beat. Then, no, to firm. Too firm. I nodded once. Some places are better left behind. Our eyes locked again. This time, neither of us looked away first. Claire shifted in her seat. "You two are so serious tonight," she laughed nervously. "What happened to just enjoying dinner?" I turned to her, softening my expression. "We are," I said gently. "Just talking." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She felt it now. Something beneath the surface. Good. Because she needed to. As dinner went on, I noticed more. Small things. The way he avoided specifics. The way he redirected questions. The way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. And then, it happened. Claire stood up to grab something from the kitchen. "I forgot the bread," she said, hurrying off. Again. Just the two of us. Daniel leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. "You've been busy," he said quietly. Not asking. Stating. I set my fork down. "Have I?" I replied. "You don't ask questions like that unless you already know the answers." I tilted my head slightly. "And you don't avoid them unless you have something to hide." A pause. Then a faint smile. "Careful," he said. "You might start seeing things that aren't there." I held his gaze. "I don't need to imagine anything," I said calmly. "I've seen enough." His expression didn't change. But something behind it did. A flicker. Recognition. Not of me. Of the situation. He understood now. I wasn't guessing. I was building something. Slowly. Carefully. Claire's footsteps approached from the kitchen. The moment closed. But it didn't disappear. As she sat back down, placing the bread between us, she smiled again, trying to pull everything back to normal. But normal was already gone. And as I looked at Daniel one more time that night, I realized something with complete certainty. He wasn't just aware of me anymore. He was starting to worry. And that meant I was getting closer. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because by that point, I already knew enough. What I needed now was something he couldn't talk his way out of. That night, after I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. Then I walked straight to the bedroom. The envelope was still where I left it. I opened it again. This time, I wasn't reading for memory. I was reading for patterns. Names. Dates. Places. I laid everything out across the table. Slowly. Carefully. Like pieces of something that had been waiting years to make sense. And now, they did. The old name. The timeline from the article. The gaps in his story. They weren't separate anymore. They aligned. I reached for my phone and dialed the number again. He answered faster this time. "You found something," he said. I did. Silence on the other end. "Then, tell me." I glanced down at the papers. "He's been using different names," I said. "Same pattern. Same kind of situations. He gets close, gains trust, then everything falls apart around him." A long exhale. "That sounds like him," he said quietly. "I need more than sounds like," I replied. "I need something real." Another pause. Then his voice lowered. "There was a report," he said. "Years ago. It never went anywhere. Not enough evidence. But I kept a copy. Do you still have it?" "Yes. I want to see it." "It's not something you should get involved in again, Margaret." I didn't respond right away. Because he was right. I shouldn't. But that wasn't the point. "He's with my daughter," I said finally. That was enough. "I'll send it," he replied. The call ended. I set the phone down and waited. It didn't take long. A message came through. An attachment. I opened it. A scanned document. Old. Slightly faded. But clear enough. I read every line. Then I read it again. Same structure. Same behavior. Different names. And at the center of it, a description that didn't need a photo. I already had that. I leaned back in my chair. So this wasn't coincidence. It never was. I closed the file and stared at the wall for a moment. Then I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't call. I sent a message. To Claire. "I'd like to have you both over again this weekend." She replied almost immediately. "Really? That would be great." I could almost hear the relief in her words. I typed one more line. "There are a few things I'd like to talk about." 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then, of course, Mom. I placed the phone down gently. Everything was moving now. Not fast. But forward. I gathered the papers, placed them neatly back into the envelope, and closed it. This time, I didn't put it away. I left it on the table. Visible. Ready. Because the next time we sat down together, it wouldn't be just dinner. And as I turned off the light and walked out of the room, one thought stayed with me. He had spent years staying ahead of people. Changing names. Changing places. Changing stories. But this time, he walked into the wrong house. And he stayed long enough for me to remember exactly how men like him operate. I didn't change anything about the house. That was intentional. The table was set the same way as before. The same china. The same silverware. Even the same white roses, freshly replaced but arranged exactly the same. Familiarity lowers defenses. People relax when things feel normal. By the time they arrived, everything was ready. Again. Claire walked in first, her smile quick, almost relieved. "It smells amazing in here," she said, setting her bag down like she always did. Daniel followed. Same posture. Same calm expression. But this time, he didn't look around. He looked at the table. Then at me. Just for a second. "Thank you for inviting us again," he said. "You're welcome," I replied. Nothing more. Dinner began quietly. Less talking this time. Claire tried, but even she could feel it, the difference. The air wasn't as light. The pauses lasted a little longer. Good. That meant I didn't have to force anything. Halfway through the meal, I stood up. "I forgot something," I said. Claire looked up. "Mom, you've already made too much, it won't take long." I walked to the hallway. Not the kitchen. The bedroom. The envelope was still on the table where I had left it. I picked it up. Held it for a moment. Then walked back. Neither of them spoke as I returned. I placed it gently on the table. Right between us. Claire frowned slightly. "What's that?" I looked at her. Something I should have dealt with years ago. Then I turned to Daniel. He didn't move. Didn't reach for it. But his eyes shifted. Just slightly. "Enough. Go ahead," I said calmly. "Open it." Claire looked between us, confusion starting to replace her smile. "Mom, what is this?" I didn't answer her. "Not yet." Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "You've been busy," he said again. This time, there was no softness in his voice. "No," I replied. "Just careful." A long pause. Then Claire reached for the envelope. "Mom, if this is some kind of joke, it's not," I said gently. She hesitated. Then opened it. Paper slid against paper. The sound was louder than it should have been. She pulled out the documents, scanning them quickly at first, then slower. Her expression changed. Confusion. Then doubt. Then something else. "What is this?" she asked quietly. I kept my eyes on Daniel. "Why don't you ask him?" I said. She turned to him. "Daniel." He didn't answer right away. He watched me. Measured the moment. Calculated. Just like before. But this time, there was no space to step around it. "These are old," he said finally. "Out of context." "Then explain them," I replied. Claire's voice trembled slightly. "Daniel, what is she talking about?" He leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Claire, listen to me, no," I said, my voice still calm. "You've had years to explain things to people." He stopped. Just for a second. And in that second, something cracked. Not enough for Claire to fully see it. But enough for me. Because I had seen it before. The moment where control starts to slip. Claire looked down at the papers again. Then back at him. Her voice softer now. "Why is there another name here?" Silence. Real silence this time. Heavy. Unavoidable. Daniel didn't answer immediately. And that was all it took. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't need to be said. It just needs the right moment to stop being hidden. Claire's hand trembled slightly as she held the paper. "Why is there another name here?" she repeated, quieter this time. Daniel didn't answer. He looked at her, then at me. Calculating. Always calculating. "It's not what you think," he said finally. Claire shook her head slowly. "Then tell me what it is." Another pause. Too long. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Because every second of silence was doing more than any words I could say. I used a different name before, he admitted. It was complicated. Complicated. Claire's voice cracked slightly. Why would you need a different name? He leaned forward. Claire, please, this was years ago. It doesn't have anything to do with us now. Us. He kept pulling it back to that. But the papers in her hand said otherwise. I watched her eyes move across the page again. Slower now. Careful. The way people read when they're afraid of understanding. There's more than just a name, she whispered. These reports, these places, she looked up at him. You told me you'd never even been there. He didn't respond. Not immediately. And that hesitation, it broke something. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Claire leaned back in her chair, her expression changing in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. Not anger. Not yet. Just realization. You lied to me, she said. Simple. Clear. Final. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but stopped. Because this time, there was nothing left to shape. No careful answer. No smooth explanation. Just the truth, sitting there between us. And for the first time since he walked into my home, he had nothing to control. Claire didn't cry. Not right away. She sat there, the papers still in her hands, as if they had weight now, real weight, not just ink on a page. Her eyes moved one last time across the lines, slower than before, as if hoping something might change if she looked long enough. It didn't. I need you to leave, she said quietly. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at him. Daniel didn't move at first. Claire, no, she said, firmer this time. Not tonight. A pause. Then he stood up. No argument. No explanation. Just silence. He looked at me once before turning toward the door. Not anger. Not even defeat. Recognition. The same look I had seen years ago. The moment he understood, it was over. The door closed behind him without a sound. And just like that, he was gone. Claire sat there for a few seconds longer. Then the papers slipped from her hands onto the table. I didn't reach for her immediately. Some moments need space. I didn't see it, she whispered. I really thought, her voice faded. I stood slowly and walked around the table, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You saw what you were meant to see, I said softly. She shook her head, a small, broken motion. I should have listened more. To you. To the signs. I didn't correct her. Because this wasn't about blame. It's over now, I said. That mattered more. She leaned into me then, just slightly. Not like a child. But not fully steady either. And I stayed there. Quiet. Present. The house felt different again. Not tense. Not heavy. Just clear. Later, after she left, I stood by the table for a moment. The plates were untouched this time. The roses still fresh. Everything exactly where it had been. But the story had changed. I picked up the envelope and held it for a second. Then I closed it. Not to hide it. But because I didn't need it anymore. Some things are meant to stay in the past. Others return, just long enough to be finished properly. I turned off the light and walked away. And this time I didn't look back.